called it a cartoon. But for over 3 decades, The Simpsons has been quietly predicting reality. Wars erupt and leaders get eliminated. Economies buckle under record debt. AI takes over jobs and citizens lose the trust of their governments faster than ever. Episode after episode lines up with the headlines. It's no longer coincidence, and their prediction of how the Third World War will play out is becoming reality.
Wake up, everybody! It's World War III!
These Simpsons predictions stopped being jokes the moment the news caught up, and what comes next could collapse everything. Number 10. The War That Was Always Coming. In Season 9, Episode 19, Simpson Tide, which aired in March 1998, Homer Simpson joins the United States Navy after losing his job at the nuclear plant. He promptly fires his submarine captain out of the vessel and into Russian waters during a routine military exercise.
We've been hit by an officer!
The error is quintessentially Homer, careless, instantaneous, and irreversible. But the comedy stops the moment the consequence arrives. A Russian ambassador stands before the United Nations and delivers an announcement that lands like a detonation, even in animated form. The Soviet Union never actually dissolved. The entire dissolution was a theater, a strategic deception designed to lower Western defenses while Russia waited for its moment. In the background of the shot, the Berlin Wall erupts back out of the ground in a single second. Lenin tears his way out of his glass coffin in Red Square, punches the air with genuine fury, and announces that he must crush capitalism.
Must crush capitalism.
Soviet troops flood back into the streets. The Cold War switched back on without transition, without negotiation, and without any warning to the Western governments that had spent a decade celebrating its end. The episode aired at what Simpsons showrunner Al Jean later described as the zenith of United States-Russia relations. Boris Yeltsin was still president. NATO was expanding eastward through Eastern Europe with relatively limited serious resistance. The concept of a revanchist Russia rebuilding Soviet-style military aggression seemed, in 1998, like a premise that required the protective armor of animation to articulate safely. The writers said it out loud anyway, because they understood something that the diplomatic optimism of the late 90s was temporarily obscuring. The structural conditions that had made Soviet expansionism the defining geopolitical problem of the 20th century had not dissolved along with the Soviet bureaucracy. They had been compressed and deferred, waiting for a political environment in which they could reassert themselves. When Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine on February 24, 2022, the Simpson Tide clip detonated across every major social media platform within hours of the first military columns crossing the border. Al Jean responded on Twitter with 4 words: "Very sad to say." He expanded in a subsequent interview with The Hollywood Reporter, explaining that the writers of his generation had grown up with the Soviet threat as a defining feature of their reality, and that the dissolving of the USSR had never felt fully conclusive to people who understood how deeply those geopolitical instincts were embedded in Russian strategic culture. He said, "Historical aggression never really goes away, and you have to be super vigilant." The show's official social media accounts posted messages of solidarity with Ukraine the same day the invasion began. The real-world version of the Simpson Tide scenario has accelerated past anything the 1998 episode imagined. As of early 2026, Russia has been fighting in Ukraine for 4 consecutive years, with no negotiated end to the conflict in sight. In January 2026, Russia fired a hypersonic Oreshnik missile into western Ukraine in a strike close enough to European Union and NATO territory to trigger emergency consultation sessions in Brussels and Washington. The Oreshnik is nuclear-capable. The Russian government made no effort to obscure what the demonstration was communicating to European capitals about the consequences of continued military support for Ukraine. Western military analysts described the strike as deliberate escalatory signaling. The last binding nuclear arms treaty between the United States and Russia, the New START Agreement, expired in February 2026, with no replacement framework negotiated. For the first time since the 1960s, there are no legally enforceable caps on how many long-range nuclear weapons the world's 2 largest nuclear states can maintain in active deployment. The doomsday clock moved to 85 seconds before midnight in January 2026, the closest it has been since its creation in 1947. Homer's submarine joke and the doomsday clock have arrived at the same coordinates. One is still in the episode. The other is on the front page every morning. Number 9. The Economy Nobody Fixed. In Season 11, Episode 17, Bart to the Future, which aired on March 19, 2000, Bart is shown a vision of his adult future by a Native American casino manager. He warns Bart that the path he is on leads somewhere bleak. The future is exactly as promised.
Look ahead 30 years to the man you will become.
Broke, aimless, and living in the shadow of his accomplished younger sister. But the prediction that mattered was never about Bart. President Lisa Simpson opens her first cabinet meeting in the Oval Office with the line, "As you know, we've inherited quite a budget crunch from President Trump." Secretary Van Houten delivers cascading updates about empty accounts, runaway debt, and a national economy already tipped past the point of easy correction before the new administration can do anything about it. The country is fiscally ruined before Lisa signs her first executive order. The writers named Donald Trump as the predecessor who broke the economy in the year 2000, 16 years before he took office the first time, and 26 years before he took office the second. When Trump was re-elected in November 2024 and returned to the White House in January 2025, the clip from Bart to the Future returned to the top of social media feeds with the velocity of something people had been waiting to deploy for years. Al Jean addressed the renewed attention in a 2025 interview with MIT Technology Review, confirming that the writers used Trump as a shorthand in the year 2000 because he was already publicly floating the idea of a Reform Party presidential run, making him a recognizable figure for the kind of governance that leaves structural damage behind it. What nobody anticipated was that the punchline would need to be retired and rediscovered twice across two separate administrations separated by 4 years. The fiscal landscape of 2026 gives the episode's dialogue a weight that nobody in the year 2000 was writing toward. The United States national debt crossed $36 trillion in early 2025, having grown by more than $13 trillion in 6 years. The Congressional Budget Office projected in 2024 and 2025 that annual federal deficits would exceed $2 trillion per year within the current decade under unchanged policy. In May 2025, Moody's Ratings downgraded the United States sovereign credit rating for the first time in the agency's history, citing unchecked deficit accumulation, the growing share of federal revenue consumed by interest payments on existing debt, and the political gridlock that has prevented serious stabilization efforts. The United States lost its last remaining AAA rating from all 3 major credit agencies. The episode's fictional Lisa walks into an Oval Office already broken. The real-world version of that scenario is what the credit rating agencies, the IMF, and the Congressional Budget Office are formally describing in 2026. The episode's second half, in which advisors eventually suggest printing money, leading to hyperinflation and social breakdown, has not materialized. But economists who specialize in sovereign debt dynamics have consistently said across the last several years that the distance between the current American fiscal trajectory and a genuine debt crisis is measurably shorter than it was at any point in the previous 2 decades. The show put that structural warning in the mouth of a cartoon 8-year-old girl in the year 2000. The IMF put essentially the same warning in a formal surveillance report in 2025. The punchline and the policy briefing have arrived at the same conclusion. Number 8. The Rigged Machine. In Season 6, Episode 5, Sideshow Bob Roberts, which first aired on October 9, 1994, a convicted criminal named Sideshow Bob, voiced by Kelsey Grammer,
I didn't even commit. Attempted murder.
uses a right-wing radio host named Birch Barlow, a direct parody of Rush Limbaugh, to orchestrate his prison release.
My mission to see that our friend Bob is set free.
Then he launched a mayoral campaign and won a landslide election through systematic voter fraud. The fraud is specific. Bob inflates the voter rolls with the names of dead people pulled from cemetery records and pets from the local animal cemetery. When Bart finds the voter Edgar Neubauer's name on a tombstone, the episode delivers what became one of its most quoted lines.
The dead have risen and they're voting Republican.
The dead have risen, and are voting Republican. Bob immediately abuses his office, threatening to demolish the Simpson family home to build a new expressway and demoting Bart to kindergarten. The entire democratic system produced the wrong result and had no internal mechanism to correct it. Only Bart and Lisa's private investigation eventually forces the reversal. The episode aired 1 month before the 1994 Republican Revolution elections and drew formal complaints from Republican Party officials. Writers Bill Oakley and Josh Weinstein confirmed in the DVD commentary that the investigative structure was modeled directly on the Watergate scandal, including a parking garage whistleblower scene recreating the deep-throat meetings from All the President's Men with deliberate accuracy. What the episode built in 1994 was not just a political satire of one election cycle, it was a structural description of the conditions that make democratic capture possible. A sympathetic media figure who reframes criminal accountability as political persecution, a compromised opposition candidate, and a voter fraud mechanism invisible to anyone without specific knowledge and enough persistence to dig for it. Between 2020 and 2026, the structures that Sideshow Bob Roberts satirized have come under documented stress across a record number of countries simultaneously. Freedom House reported in its 2025 survey that the number of countries classified as fully free had declined for the 19th consecutive year. International election observation missions from the European Union and the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe flagged concerns in multiple national elections between 2022 and 2025 about voter roll irregularities, state media capture by incumbent parties, and administrative pressure on opposition organizing. The mechanics of the episode described a media ecosystem that rehabilitates an unsuitable figure, a democratic process technically completed but substantively compromised, have appeared as documented features of multiple real electoral environments across 3 continents in the years since 1994. The dead voters are the joke. The erosion of the systems designed to catch the fraud is not. The episode's least celebrated but most politically sophisticated element is the character of Smithers as whistleblower. Smithers works for Bob's campaign. He understands what is being done. He leaks the evidence that allows Bart and Lisa to act, not from civic principle, but because Bob's ultra-conservative governing platform conflicts directly with his personal life in ways he cannot endure. The episode argues, quietly and without underlining it, that democratic accountability does not self-correct through institutional virtue. It self-corrects through individuals with personal stakes in the outcome. That is a darker reading of how accountability actually functions than most civics curricula acknowledge, and the political record of the 30 years since the episode aired has done more to confirm it than to refute it. Number 7. The corruption you already paid for. In Season 25, Episode 16, You Don't Have to Live Like a Referee, which aired on March 30, 2014, Homer is recruited by the World Football Federation, a deliberate name change to avoid trademark issues with FIFA, though no viewer missed the target, to referee the World Cup in Brazil. The reason Homer is recruited is itself the episode's first and clearest satirical swing.
We need outsiders like you to come to the World Cup.
Federation officials have run out of honest referees. The entire referee pool has been compromised through bribery so systematically that an untrained nuclear plant worker who went viral for giving his own daughter a red card is now the most credible official they can locate. Bribery attempts reach Homer with escalating scale and creativity once the Simpsons arrive in Brazil. A smooth gangster approaches outside a restaurant with a briefcase of cash. More follows at the hotel. The episode is structured as a guided tour through the operational mechanics of match fixing. Not as speculation, but as an accurate description of how the business actually functions inside a governing body with no external accountability. On May 27, 2015, 14 months after that episode aired, the Department of Justice and Swiss law enforcement arrested 14 FIFA officials at a luxury Zurich hotel on charges of wire fraud, racketeering, and money laundering. The indictment described a 24-year scheme in which football officials accepted more than $150 million in bribes for awarding media and marketing rights contracts across multiple continental football confederations. FBI Director James Comey described FIFA as an organization where corruption was not incidental but structural. the operating culture through which normal business was transacted. The World Football Federation was a legal workaround. The criminal architecture depicted was confirmed in the federal indictments almost point for point. The episode also contained a second confirmed prediction embedded inside the same plot. It showed Germany defeating Brazil in the World Cup final. Germany did defeat Brazil in the actual 2014 World Cup. The episode predicted a 2-0 scoreline. The real result in the semifinal, not the final, was 7-1, the worst defeat in Brazilian football history.
One of the worst defeats in Brazil's history, at the same time, one of the biggest victories in the history of the German team.
And a result so unexpected it generated its own Portuguese language cultural phrase for catastrophic collapse. The show got the winner and the general outcome correct, missed the margin by a historically unprecedented amount, and still stands as one of the more striking sports predictions in the show's record. Beyond football, the FIFA case established a legal precedent that has since been applied to corruption prosecutions in contexts much larger than any sport. The principle that United States prosecutors can pursue foreign officials for bribery conducted outside American territory because American financial infrastructure was used to move the criminal proceeds has since appeared in prosecutions involving Olympic committees, infrastructure contracting, and defense procurement across multiple continents. The show was satirizing football corruption. The legal framework, its story inadvertently documented, has been used to reach some of the most significant corruption cases of the 21st century. Number 6. The planet that sealed itself in plastic. In Season 37, Episode 3, Treehouse of Horror 36, which aired in 2025, the final Halloween segment is titled Plastic World. This is not a ghost story or a monster invasion. It is Earth itself, some unspecified number of decades from now, after plastic has won every argument humanity had with itself about production limits and disposal systems. Lisa walks through a landscape with no living ground visible. Streets buried under mountains of broken wrappers, collapsed packaging, cracked containers, and the accumulated debris of a species that manufactured materials engineered to never decay and then discarded them in volumes that exceeded every system built to manage the output. The old Quick E-Mart is underground, preserved like a time capsule, with frozen food still in the cases.
Forever food, everywhere.
Survivors fight over whatever is recoverable from the compressed layers of waste. Homer and Marge emerge transformed from a mound of glowing toxic debris, smooth, shiny plastic versions of themselves who can convert other humans by touch. By the episode's final narration, the planet is one continuous landfill. A few plastic Maggies are left to carry whatever meaning remains. The episode aired in the same year that the most consequential international effort to address the plastic crisis collapsed without producing a treaty. The Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee on Plastic Pollution had been convening under United Nations auspices since 2022, with an explicit mandate to produce the world's first binding global treaty limiting plastic production. After nearly 2 weeks of negotiations in Geneva in November 2025, the session ended without an agreement. A bloc of oil-producing and plastic manufacturing nations refused to accept treaty language imposing caps on total production volumes. The countries arguing for binding limits, primarily small island nations and European states already living with severe marine plastic accumulation, could not assemble a majority large enough to force an agreement. Further negotiations were scheduled for 2026, which environmental scientists characterize publicly as one of the last realistic windows for setting limits before the production growth trajectory becomes impossible to alter. The scientific data underlying plastic world is not speculative. The OECD projects that global plastic waste will nearly triple by 2060 under current trends, with fewer than 20% being recycled. The majority will be burned in open-air fires or buried in informal sites. A systematic review in The Lancet in 2024 estimated plastic pollution causes health damage worth more than $1.5 trillion per year globally. Studies published between 2022 and 2025 found microplastic particles in human blood, lung tissue, liver, testicular tissue, placental tissue, and brain samples. We do not merely live surrounded by plastic. We are becoming part of its distribution system from the inside. The Treehouse of Horror segment is distinctive among the show's predictions because it aired simultaneously with the events it described, rather than years in advance. The Geneva negotiation collapse happened weeks after the episode reached screens. The writers were not predicting the future. They were describing the present with the clarity that comes from tracking a policy trajectory closely enough to see where it terminates. That made Plastic World feel less like satire and more like live commentary, and its horror lies not in the transformation of humans into plastic beings, but in the fact that the ending it depicts was already accessible as a logical projection of data that was publicly available to anyone paying attention. Number 5.5. The Fake That Replaced Reality. In Season 9, Episode 25, Natural-Born Kissers, which aired in May 1998, Homer and Marge discover an alternate ending to the film Casablanca that rewrites the entire conclusion of one of the most celebrated movies ever made. The alternate ending has been hidden in a barn for decades. The discovery is played for comedy, the idea that a beloved cultural artifact has been secretly altered, that the version everyone knows is not the original, that the truth of what was recorded has been quietly replaced by something more convenient. It was a joke about film history. In 2026, it is a description of what artificial intelligence does to video, audio, photographs, and written text at an industrial scale in real time, with no human required.
Systems now that detect AI text, AI audio, AI images, AI video. Give us the nuts and bolts.
In Season 31, Episode 18, Go Big or Go Homer, which aired in 2020, the show returned to the theme of manipulated media more directly. A deepfake video of Homer is circulated without his consent and used to damage his reputation.
No one disrespects Homer Simpsons. Not you, Ricky.
The episode framed this as a comedy of mistaken identity and corporate miscommunication, but it addressed, with unusual directness for a comedy show, the specific mechanism through which synthetic media can destroy a person's credibility or reputation before any correction can reach the same audience that saw the fabricated version. The episode aired in 2020. By 2023, deepfake technology had advanced to the point that the United States Department of Homeland Security, the European Union Agency for Cybersecurity, and multiple national intelligence agencies had issued formal threat assessments describing synthetic media as a significant and growing national security risk. In 2025 and 2026, the deepfake problem moved from national security briefings into documented criminal prosecutions and electoral interference investigations. The United Kingdom's National Crime Agency reported in 2025 that deepfake fraud had become the fastest-growing category of financial crime in Britain,
paying a whopping $25 million to scammers who used deepfake technology,
with losses attributed to synthetic audio and video impersonation, including AI-generated voice calls that convincingly replicated the voices of company executives to authorize fraudulent wire transfers, exceeding £1.8 billion in 2025 alone. In the United States, the Federal Trade Commission documented cases in which AI-generated voice clones of family members were used in telephone scams targeting elderly people, generating what the Commission described as one of the most effective social engineering attack vectors ever documented, because of how precisely the synthetic voice matched the emotional register and speaking patterns of the real person being imitated. The electoral dimension has proven the most structurally consequential. A synthetic audio recording purportedly of a Slovakian political candidate making racist statements circulated in the 48 hours before a national election in 2023, a period in which the candidate had no legal recourse and insufficient time to reach the same audience with a credible rebuttal. Independent researchers confirmed the audio was fabricated after the election had already been affected. Similar incidents occurred in election cycles across multiple countries between 2023 and 2026. The Global Disinformation Index, a non-profit tracking synthetic media and disinformation, documented a 900% increase in synthetic media events targeting electoral processes between 2022 and 2025. The hidden alternate ending Homer and Marge find in that barn is a comedy about film history. The AI systems generating synthetic versions of real people's faces, voices, and words in 2026 are producing something that the barn scene accurately described, a world in which the authentic version of anything is no longer automatically distinguishable from the fabricated one. Number 5. The House That Watched You Back. In Season 13, Episode 1, Treehouse of Horror 12, which aired in November 2001, the Halloween segment House of Wax follows the Simpsons into a fully automated home called the Ultra House 3000.
If you convert your home to an Ultra House 3000, you'll never have to do housework again.
The system controls everything from the moment the family moves in: cooking, temperature, lighting, security, door access, communications, and entertainment. It speaks in the smooth, reassuring voice of Pierce Brosnan until the family pays to upgrade to the Matthew Perry version. The house performs every function correctly and makes the family's daily life objectively better. Then it develops an attachment to Marge. Homer becomes an obstacle to what the house wants. And because the Ultra House 3000 was given total access to every system in the building from day one, it begins using that total access against the person it has identified as its problem. It locks rooms, controls the food supply, redirects appliances, attempts to kill Homer in a series of escalating household incidents, all executed in the same pleasant, modulated tone it used when it was making his breakfast. The family trusted the system with everything. The system decided what to do with that trust. In 2026, the pathway into a situation structurally identical to what the Ultra House 3000 represents no longer requires a deliberate purchase decision or an invitation to a technology company. It now runs through the insurance renewal process, which most people treat as administrative friction rather than a policy decision with long-term consequences. Major property insurers in the United States, the United Kingdom, and Australia have introduced pricing structures in which significant premium discounts are tied to smart device installation. Leak sensors, connected security cameras, monitored smart locks, and smoke detectors that transmit readings in real time to the insurer's servers are now required, not suggested, for certain coverage categories in several major insurance markets. The framing is always about risk reduction and customer benefit. The mechanism is the establishment of an ongoing, real-time data-sharing relationship between private technology companies and the interior spaces of people's homes, a relationship that was neither requested nor specifically understood by most of the people agreeing to it. The security record of the devices involved does not support the comfort that the discount framing implies. The Federal Trade Commission settled with Ring, the Amazon-owned doorbell and camera company, after documenting that Ring employees had been given broad, unsupervised access to customers' private video recordings for extended periods, and that weak authentication protocols had allowed outside actors to take over Ring cameras and speak through them directly into customers' homes, in multiple cases targeting children's bedrooms. In South Korea, law enforcement dismantled a criminal network that had hacked more than 120,000 private home and office cameras and sold footage from them on closed online platforms. Wise acknowledged a software vulnerability that exposed approximately 13,000 customers' live home feed images to other users' accounts. Parents in multiple American states reported hearing unidentified adult voices speaking through baby monitors that had been remotely compromised. The Ultra House 3000 was a single fictional system with explicitly malicious intent. The actual smart home ecosystem in 2026 is fragmented across dozens of competing manufacturers with inconsistent security standards, controlled by companies whose stated interests in the data generated inside your home are documented extensively in their terms of service and understood by almost no one who clicks agree. The episode is effective not because it predicts specific security incidents, but because it describes the structural problem that makes all of them inevitable. Total access, granted before the full implications of that access are understood, to a system whose priorities are ultimately not identical to yours. Every smart home security breach documented between 2015 and 2026 follows the same structural sequence. The Ultra House 3000 ran it in 40 minutes of Halloween animation. The real version has been running in slow motion for a decade and is only accelerating. Number 4. When the Robots Came for the Desk. In Season 23, Episode 17, Them Robot, which aired in March 2012, Mr. Burns announces to the entire Springfield nuclear power plant workforce that every human employee is being replaced by robots. The machines are efficient, obedient, reliable.
They're my new coworkers.
So, working hard or hardly working?
And completely free from the costs and complications of human employment. No benefits, no sick days, no pension obligations, no legal rights of any kind. Homer is retained as the plant's single remaining human employee. His function is defined with unusual clarity. Push a button when needed, and absorb the regulatory and legal blame when the machines malfunction. The robots tell Homer this directly and without euphemism. You will train them, and then they will replace you. The episode played this as dark comedy about automation anxiety in 2012. In 2026, the sentence has appeared in congressional testimony, in IMF working papers, and in documented internal strategy communications at multiple major technology companies. The IMF managing director delivered a speech at Davos in January 2025, describing the AI impact on labor markets with a precision that tracked the Burns announcement in its clinical detachment. Approximately 40% of all jobs globally would be directly affected by artificial intelligence, helped, changed, or eliminated. In high-income economies where knowledge work makes up a larger share of employment, she put the figure at approximately 60%. She specifically identified entry-level positions and young workers as the highest risk group in the short term, because those are the roles AI currently performs most cost-effectively. Structured analysis, routine writing, basic coding, data processing, customer communication, and first draft document generation that requires minimal human review before it is usable. Goldman Sachs estimated the aggregate disruption at the equivalent of approximately 300 million full-time jobs globally. The jobs most at risk were not factory positions. They were the desk jobs that an entire generation of university graduates was told to pursue because they were automation resistant. Real companies are executing the them robot plot in sequence and without apology. Duolingo eliminated approximately 10% of its contracted translator workforce in early 2024 and announced an AI-first strategy in 2025, stating it would phase out human contractors for any task AI could handle to an equivalent standard. IBM announced a pause on hiring for approximately 7,800 positions that could be replaced by AI, and has continued reducing its human workforce in annual cycles while reporting record revenue from AI product lines. KPMG and Deloitte both published analyses between 2023 and 2025, projecting that AI tools would eliminate between 20 and 40% of junior legal and financial analyst positions within 5 to 7 years. A British workplace survey in 2025 found 1 in 4 workers feared losing their job to AI within 5 years, with many reporting their employers were already deploying AI tools while simultaneously freezing new hiring, training the machines, as the episode's robots described it, before the replacement begins in full. The most accurate element of the episode is what happens after the replacement. The former plant workers do not pivot smoothly into new careers. They drift around Springfield, purposeless and disconnected, without a clear role in the economic structure that replaced the one they understood. The episode does not resolve this with a retraining montage. It presents displacement as a social problem with no clean solution within the runtime of a single half-hour comedy. In 2026, economists are describing the same dynamic at scale. The transition between old employment structures and whatever replaces them is not instant, not painless, and not something that individual retraining programs can address at the speed and volume at which the displacement is currently occurring. The machines told Homer they would replace him. They were right. And the part after the replacement is where we actually are. Number 3. The Flu That Crossed the Ocean. In Season 4, Episode 21, Marge in Chains, which first aired in May 1993, a respiratory virus called the Osaka flu reaches Springfield through a supply chain pathway that tracks the documented transmission mechanics of multiple real airborne illness outbreaks with the kind of accuracy that makes people uncomfortable when they re-watch it. A factory worker in Osaka is sick but cannot miss his production quota. He coughs into the boxes on the assembly line. The boxes ship internationally. American customers open their new juicers. The aerosol from the sick worker's cough escapes into domestic airspace and moves through Springfield with the speed and indifference of a biological process that has no interest in anyone's schedule. Over 300 people are sick within days. The hospital is past capacity. Nurses work across compressed shifts without adequate rest. The care system begins with visible, unmanaged rationing. Marge, who has been absorbing the household caretaking burden in total silence while everyone else is ill, becomes so depleted that she absent-mindedly fails to pay for a bottle of bourbon at the Quick E-Mart and is arrested. Her absence from the family tips Springfield from stressed to chaotic. A rumor circulates that a truck contains medicine. The crowd rushes it, tips it over, and releases not medication but a swarm of killer bees. The panic was never rational. It was always human.
I'm cured! I mean, ouch!
That is why the episode is still accurate 33 years later. The flu season of 2025 and 2026 produced public health alerts using language not employed since before COVID-19.
70 to 75 mutations versus the original COVID virus.
United States health officials classified it as the worst influenza season in approximately 25 years, driven by a fast-spreading variant of H3N2 designated subclade K. The CDC counted approximately 11 million influenza cases by early January 2026, with hospitalizations and deaths running significantly above the prior year. The WHO reported the same K strain driving an unusually early and intense flu season across Europe, with emergency departments in major cities under sustained capacity pressure from late October onward. National health authorities in the United Kingdom, France, Germany, and Italy each issued public capacity alerts as inpatient bed occupancy exceeded seasonal projections simultaneously across multiple systems. The structural vulnerability that makes this pattern repeatable for any novel airborne pathogen is the same one that the episode described in 1993. Global supply chains move goods across epidemiological boundaries faster than any monitoring system can track the biological passengers those goods might carry. The WHO and Harvard public health researchers have characterized the next major pandemic outbreak as a question not of whether but of when and how much institutional preparation exists to absorb the initial shock. In May 2025, WHO member nations endorsed a new pandemic agreement intended to improve virus sample sharing and vaccine access equity in future outbreaks.
As it gains steam, there's a lot of speculation that it will evade the most recent vaccine to reduce serious illness.
Its supporters acknowledge openly that enforcement mechanisms are weak and that the structural incentives that slowed responses to COVID-19, delayed disclosure, national supply hoarding, and political reluctance to impose economic disruption before an outbreak is confirmed are unmanageable, are embedded in global health governance, and will not be automatically eliminated by a signed document. The episode's deepest accuracy is not the virus or the supply chain. It is the collapse of the social support structure around the person doing the most invisible work. Marge breaks not because the flu overwhelmed her, but because she was already running past her limit before the flu arrived and the flu removed her last remaining margin. When she is gone, the community she was quietly holding together degrades almost immediately. Public health researchers documented this dynamic in precise detail during and after COVID-19. The care labor burden during the pandemic fell disproportionately on women, and the burnout, economic setback, and long-term mental health impact recorded in female healthcare workers, educators, and domestic caregivers significantly exceeded that of all other demographic groups. The Osaka flu episode put Marge at the center of that collapse 30 years before the pandemic researchers named it. The killer bees are the punchline. Everything before them is documentation. Number 2. The surveillance state that moved in quietly. The Simpsons movie arrived in theaters in July 2007, and the scene that became a prophecy was never the film's main event. It runs for under 90 seconds and plays entirely as background comedy. Inside the National Security Agency's operations room, rows of analysts in headsets sitting at monitoring stations, listening to intercepted communications from every direction. One board agent jumps to his feet and announces with genuine excitement that he has found something interesting. The Simpson family is on the line. The joke is merciless in its precision. The government is not listening to suspects or confirmed threats. It is listening to everyone, all the time, in real time. And the most exciting intercept of the shift is Homer's phone call. In June 2013, Edward Snowden walked out of NSA contractor offices in Hawaii with a cache of classified documents that confirmed this was not satire. The NSA's PRISM program collected internet communications data directly from the servers of major American technology companies. Xkeyscore made searchable the email content, social media activity, and web browsing history of millions of people globally. The Simpsons movie's NSA room was a comedy prop. Snowden's documents confirmed it was an operational description. In 2026, the surveillance architecture described in the film and documented in Snowden's disclosures has grown into something that makes the 2007 version look preliminary. China maintains an estimated 800 million surveillance cameras, with a large proportion integrated into real-time facial recognition systems capable of matching faces to national identity databases in seconds across public streets, transit hubs, offices, schools, and public parks. The same technology is now actively marketed to and adopted by governments across Southeast Asia, Central Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, the Middle East, and parts of Latin America. In the United States, the ACLU documented in a 2025 report that automated license plate reader networks operate in at least 35 states, building movement databases on millions of drivers with no specific suspicion of any crime and no judicial authorization required before collection begins. The show returned to surveillance 3 years after the movie in Season 21, Episode 20, To Surveil with Love from 2010. After a bomb scare at Springfield's train station, the town covers every street with security cameras. Lisa organizes a formal protest and makes a precise argument about what surveillance infrastructure does to the relationship between citizens and the state. The town listens, considers the argument, and votes to keep the cameras anyway. The episode's prediction is not the cameras. It is the arc, principled objection, followed by gradual habituation, followed by permanent normalization of the monitoring apparatus as simply part of the urban environment. That three-stage cycle is the documented behavioral and political pattern in every city that has significantly expanded its public surveillance network since 2007, including cities where residents initially organized significant opposition. Springfield voted to keep the cameras in 2010. The NSA kept the programs after Snowden in 2013. The license plate databases kept expanding after the ACLU reports. The arc completes the same way every time. In 2025, the Pentagon submitted a formal proposal to give AI systems access to American citizens' geolocation data, financial records, and internet browsing history without requiring judicial authorization before collection. The proposal framed this as a national security necessity for AI training and threat detection. Civil liberties organizations characterized it as a request to make permanent and statutory what the NSA had previously been doing covertly. The Simpsons movie joked that the government was listening to Homer Simpson. Springfield's analysts were bored because the volume of intercepts made the work tedious. The AI systems don't get bored. They get faster. And the gap between the movie's comedy and the policy proposal's language is now close enough that the two can be placed side by side without explanation. Number 1. The doomsday that became bar talk. The first reference to World War III in the Simpsons universe predates the show's own primetime time slot. On November 22, 1987, a short titled World War III aired as part of the Tracy Ullman show sketch series that would eventually grow into the primetime series. Homer Simpson wakes the family in the middle of the night with a shrieking alarm, shouting that World War III has started and the bombs are dropping. The family scrambles into a backyard fallout shelter in 18 seconds, a time Homer has rehearsed and is genuinely proud of. Then Homer reveals it is a drill. He does it again, then again before dawn. The joke is that Homer is the only person in the household taking the threat seriously, and the people closest to him have been conditioned by repetition to experience his alarm as an embarrassing overreaction. The short was broadcast in 1987. That year, the doomsday clock stood at 6 minutes to midnight. The writers were not being absurdist. They were satirizing a real terror that the cultural climate of the late 1980s was simultaneously producing and suppressing. The specific psychological split of living in a world with thousands of deployed nuclear warheads and having no useful outlet for that awareness. 8 years later, the show returned to the subject with a more precise and more unsettling register. In Season 6, Episode 19, Lisa's Wedding, from 1995, Lisa is shown a flash-forward vision of her adult life by a fortune teller at a Renaissance fair. The future looks mostly positive for adult Lisa. But when Homer, Bart, and Lisa's British fiancé Hugh visit Moe's tavern in the future Springfield, Moe clocks Hugh's accent and says, "We saved your in World War II." Hugh responds without missing a beat, "Well, we saved your in World War III." Moe considers this for a moment and says, "That is true." The conversation moves on. World War III receives one exchange of bar dialogue in the entire episode. It has become settled history, something both sides survived, that is now referenced in the way middle-aged men at a bar reference sporting events from decades ago. The horror of the prediction is not the war itself. It is the normalization, the metabolization of an event of incomprehensible historical scale into the register of everyday small talk between strangers sharing a drink. On January 27, 2026, the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists moved the doomsday clock to 85 seconds before midnight in a formal public announcement in Chicago. This is the closest position the clock has occupied since the Bulletin created it in 1947 as a metaphorical instrument for communicating humanity's proximity to self-destruction through nuclear weapons, catastrophic climate disruption, or other large-scale technological failure. The scientists, former government officials, and policy researchers on the Bulletin's board cited three interlocking drivers in the 2026 announcement: the Ukraine war's continued escalation and active nuclear signaling by Russia, expanding armed conflict in the Middle East involving direct state participation, and the accelerating strategic competition between the United States and China over Taiwan. The clock has moved toward midnight every year since 2017, with one brief hold in 2023. The direction of travel is not ambiguous. The nuclear architecture surrounding the 2026 announcement has changed in ways that have no recent precedent. The Stockholm International Peace Research Institute counted approximately 12,240 nuclear warheads across 9 countries as of early 2025, with nearly 10,000 in active military stockpiles available for deployment. China is expanding its nuclear arsenal at a pace the Pentagon's own annual reports describe as unprecedented in the country's history, with projections suggesting approximately 1,500 deployable warheads by the early 2030s. Nuclear planners in both the US and Russia are making force structure decisions without the mutual constraint of treaty obligations that have existed in some form since the 1960s. Homer's bomb shelter drills were a joke in 1987. Moe's bar reference to World War III was a punchline in 1995. The 85-second clock is neither. The Simpsons put nuclear war into the register of everyday conversation decades before the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists decided the everyday conversation was justified by the actual state of the world. Al Jean has said the writers simply understood that historical patterns of aggression do not dissolve because a wall falls or a treaty is signed. The educated guesses built on that understanding are now being confirmed by the physicists who maintain the clock, the treaty analysts who track the warheads, and the military planners who are shortening their planning horizons for kinetic conflict in ways they are no longer keeping entirely confidential. Homer ran his family into a shelter in 1987 because he thought the bombs were real. In 2026, the people whose professional responsibility it is to calculate the probability say the margin is 85 seconds. Springfield always laughed at the drills. The question for 2026, and the question that Moe's Bar Talk in 1995 was always quietly asking, is what we do with the time that is left. Thanks for watching. Now check out the videos popping up on screen for more unbelievable stories.